Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Tales from the Hills, so growing up in the Ozarks is awesome. We've got rivers, lakes, amazing sights, and cool stories. But some of these stories are kinda, well, weird. And I'd like to share them with everyone here. Also, disclaimer, I'm not here to say that any of these are true, but in this world, you never know. So here goes nothing. I'll be posting different stories every now and then, so stick around. Here we go. So the area I live in is really rural. It's actually smack dab in the middle of a park. It covers hundreds of square miles, mostly just woodlands. And being in the Ozark Mountains, everything is either on top of a hill or down in a valley. Well, way back, a dam was constructed to do, well, dam stuff. And after it was made, a large area was now underwater, becoming a lake, the name of which I won't be telling for privacy reasons. Now all around this lake are areas we call bottoms. When the rain comes, the lake always floods, making these flat valley areas around the lake and the creeks that run into it into marshy wetlands. It's kind of its own little world separated from reality by the massive hills that surround it. We also have hollers. These are just kinda like valleys and depressions between large ridgelines. These usually have names. For example, there's Crow Holler, Dill Holler, and Criswell Holler, to name a few. Well, in one particular holler, the bottoms and the holler meet. We call this area Swamp Holler. This is where our story takes place. I'm not really sure when this story began, but I know it's old. Everyone knows it. We usually hear our grandparents tell it, or hunters who've been to the area. After all, swamp holler deer are said to be the biggest around. But that doesn't matter. What matters is what else is in Swamp Holler. She's called a few things. The Yellow Lady, the Swamp Holler Woman, the Yellow Ghost of the Holler, and even that Yellow Witch to some. No matter what her name is, her description is always the same. While the name changes, the description doesn't. A skinny, pale woman with pale skin and black hair. She's always seen in a yellow dress, hence the name. No one knows who she is, but many people speculate that she was once a widow who took her own life in the holler. Others think she may just be a ghost from one of the many graveyards in the area. But very rarely you'll find someone who thinks she's a demon, roaming the swamp looking for lost souls to drag back to hell. Among those who have seen her, almost none of them have stuck around long enough to investigate, or even get a very good look at her face. The people of the Ozarks are very superstitious and don't want to go messing around with things they don't understand. Everyone that's told me about their encounter have claimed they simply just get back into their vehicle and leave as fast as possible. Most people just avoid the area altogether, fearing she will do all manner of bad things to them. They all think this despite the fact that no one has gone missing in the area for as long as anyone has known about the Yellow Lady. Staunch believers in her say she's not there to do harm herself, but to bring bad luck. It's said that after an encounter, the person who saw her can expect to have a terrible hunt, whether that be something small like they don't see another animal or they just miss, or something bad like a hospital visit or even a fire. No matter what anyone thinks, everyone has silently agreed to avoid the area altogether in fear of seeing this mythic woman. At the end of the day, she could just be made up by old hunters who just want to have the area to themselves. Or maybe, just maybe, she is really out there bringing bad luck to all who look upon her. Tell me what you think.
I used to visit my great-great-uncle with my grandparents in some godforsaken holler in North Carolina when I was a kid. Had a lot of fun in that old cabin, but also had some weird shit happen. Be me 10. Visiting Uncle Blanche for like the second or third time ever. Uneventful day playing in a woods with my cousin. Granddad calls us in at sundown for supper in bed. Cool no prob .wav, I'm fucking beat. Asleep. Hear blood-curdling scream outside. Sounds like some 80s scream queen giving natural birth in a bathtub. Directly outside, nearly on the porch. Hear Granddad and Uncle Blanche running downstairs. Uncle Blanche say goddamn haints on my goddamn mountain. Go into the main room and see him loading an old shotgun. Steps outside. Rush to the window. Uncle Blanche is staring down a cougar with 2 cubs. None of them are moving. Uncle Blanche says something. My nephew and his grandkid is here, not tonight. The cougars turn around at the same time and walk back into the woods. Uncle Blanche refuses to talk about it that night. Never explains anything about it except that the shotgun shells were rock salt. Dumbass kid, so continue to play in a woods like nothing was wrong. Be me, 2 weeks ago. Ask Granddad if he remembers that. Gets quiet over the phone. I didn't think you remembered that. Don't worry about it, bud. It was just a cougar. But Uncle Blanche talked to it. Changes the subject to women's college softball. Granddad is an old perv, and I love him for it. Before anyone mentions it, Blanche is a girl's name. I know it. He knew it. You know it. His dad was an alcoholic and an asshole.
Be me in 2006, a pretty dark and cold winter. Visiting grandparents in another holler about 2 hours south. Have family friends that live close by with a slightly autistic son I would hang out with occasionally. We would explore the forest, build forts, play war and vidya, etc., playing Silent Hill 3 on his PS2 in a smaller cabin separate from their house. Scared shitless, but whatever. Go out to water a tree. The ground is all covered in snow, dampened sound, making everything eerily silent. All is dark, other than their porch light and the light from a lamp inside the little cabin. Enjoying my time watching my piss melt the ice and snow. Suddenly, hear a noise. Not the crack of a stick from an animal or the howling of wind. That would have been a relief. Sounds weird, almost otherworldly, like the noise a frozen lake makes. Except there are no lakes for many, many miles. Repeating and echoing gulps emanating from the forest line down the hill behind me. Actually shit myself and ran back into the cabin. Tell my friend about the noise. Oh yeah, it does that sometimes. What do you mean? He's too interested in the game to answer. I still have no idea what he was talking about.
I've got a yarn from Old Kentuck. My dad's side of the family hails from there. Before that, they were Scottish peasants, most likely. And they brought over a bunch of weird superstitions that got mixed up with a little German and Irish and Native American lore. This story's different, though. It's about a place near my family's home in the mountains. A place my gramps and pops just call the Holler. Dad grew up hearing all sorts of stories about the Holler. Most of them came from my gramps, but Grandma used to warn him about the place too. If you don't know, a holler is just a kind of dip in the mountains, a low valley basically. Gramps used to tell him about seeing fairies and other shit there. Even Grandma didn't believe those stories, but she still insisted that the holler was haunted ground and that Dad should keep away from it now. These are Appalachian people, dirt poor, and not all that educated. Still, nobody Dad's age really believed the stories about the holler being haunted ground. But you know how it is. You don't have to believe a superstition to respect it. Dad and the other kids kept far away from the holler, and that's the way it was until Dad's friend Tom got it in him to go down there one day. Dad tried to dissuade him. Nothing worked. Tom was Dad's best friend, though, and he couldn't let him go alone, so off they went together. They spent an hour in the holler, and nothing strange happened at all. So the two of them got into the habit of going there and digging for arrowheads. One day, Tom noticed a small patch of earth under a tree that looked like it had been recently dug up. After digging around, Tom pulled out a bag. In the bag was a severed hand. Dad told me it seemed like maybe the severed hand had been treated with something and dried. He thinks this because the hand was very stiff and wrinkled, like a dried piece of meat, and it didn't smell a bit or seem decomposed, even though it was clearly ancient. Anyway, both he and Tom thought this was a really cool find, but Dad couldn't help but bring up the idea about the holler being haunted ground. He and Tom were worried that maybe they'd disturbed something by digging up the hand, so they quickly reburied it and left the place. After that, they didn't go there as much. But one day, Dad saw Tom walking by the house, headed in the direction of the holler. He called out, but Tom didn't respond. Dad had chores, so he just shrugged it off and went back to work. Well, you might be able to guess what happened next. Tom never came back. Dad didn't even find out until Gramps approached him. "Have you been going down to the holler with that boy, Tom?" he asked. Dad was scared, but he didn't want to lie. "Yes, sir." Grandpa looked incensed. It turns out Tom's parents had asked Gramps for his help. They were going down into the holler to look for Tom. Dad has no idea how they knew to look down there. They found no sign of Tom except for his shoes and hat. It was found lying under the tree where they found the severed hand. Now I called this a yarn, and I hope that's what it was. But the way Dad told it always left a little room for doubt in my mind.
Going to share one since this is my first visit back. The only thing that has ever happened to me that I cannot find a logical explanation for. A few years ago, living in my own place up a holler, or hollow, about half a mile up the road from my parents' house. All day a helicopter was landing on the peak of a hillside between mine and my parents' house. It would do this for an hour or so, leave, and then come back. There were 4 men dressed in black, obviously holding weapons hanging out the sides. I decided to walk the road to my parents and watch the spectacle with them. We sat on the porch watching it all day, skimming trees, flying close to the ground, landing, leaving, returning. Rinse and repeat for the entire day. It was getting late, so I asked my mom to drive me home. Don't want to walk. High possibility of getting flattened by a speeding meth head on a 1-lane road that has no lights. We pull into the driveway and my mom pushes her head up over the steering wheel of the SUV and close to the windshield. She let out a loud, "What in the hell?" in our thick Appalachian accent. Get out of the car and an orange orb the size of a basketball is shining down onto my house. It's bright and way up. We stood there and just stared at it for a few minutes. Out of nowhere, it shot like a bat out of hell towards the spot the chopper kept landing. As soon as it reached the spot, it shot straight up at a 90-degree angle and sped off into nothing.
I've got one that isn't necessarily scary, but more just weird. Down in Tennessee on family land, belongs to my great-grandmother. A really hilly area, house in a small valley near a creek, road we call the Holler that leads up to a cow pasture through hilly woods. I liked taking long walks around the forest in this place, but typically we keep to the trails because riding 4-wheelers is easier there and because of snakes. Decide to go exploring today. Go about halfway up the Holler before turning off to the left, jumping over a little creek that runs alongside the trail. Tall, thin trees all around, deafening sound of bullfrogs and cicadas. Decent breeze through the hills also means the leaves are rustling. It's that time of day where the sun is just beginning to set and everything is kind of bluish. I'm walking around. Keep in mind this is private property too. Find a couple of trees with orange cloth lashed around them. Follow the trees. Eventually find what looks to be a really shitty hunter tower made out of a ladder that is basically nailed to a tree with a shitty metal platform. Nearby there is what appears to be a really old campfire with broken chairs around it. Poke a bit at the ashes and realize there is something in them. In the ashes, covered by them, is a plastic Walmart bag. Tear it open with a stick, and the whole thing is filled with scraps of cloth with plaid and denim patterns, like someone shredded clothes and put them in a bag. Don't really know what to think of it, but getting creeped out and feel like I'm being watched. Probably just because it was weird. I never saw anyone out there. Move onwards, back towards Grandma's house, but still going through woods that I haven't been in before. Find an old-ass wagon that was basically lodged into a pile of dirt. Crazy old horse-drawn wagon of some type, the wood all warped and rotten. Bust a couple pieces of the wood, reveal some old quilts or something. So I continue on from this wagon. Weird that it's out on our property and so close to where we usually go. Reach a part within clear sight distance to the Holler, about 20 to 30 paces away from it. There's just a door standing there, an old wooden door. It isn't painted or anything, but the door frame around it looked like it had some white paint on it once. There are no walls, debris, or even a foundation. Looking back, this just screams trouble, but for some reason, I decided to open it. Little me probably thought it lead to some Harry Potter-ass wonderland, but looking back, this is the kind of shit that gets people killed in stories. Reach out to the doorknob, old corroded brass or copper or something like that. Try to turn it and it sticks a bit. Finally turn it and go to pull. The whole door just crumbles and falls down in pieces, except for this long, jagged piece around the doorknob, about the length of 2 feet. I remember this shape perfectly still, It has a bit about the doorknob, but then a lot below it, all straight on one side, but the other side was going from one side of the board cutting across to a corner, like a knife blade. I just sort of stand there looking at the pile of wood for a bit, with this doorknob in my hand. Feel intensely creeped out and start looking around wildly, trying to see if someone is watching me in the woods. Realize how dark it is getting and that I need to head back. On my way back, I reach this pond that is near the entry of the Holler, where a shit ton of bullfrogs live. But I realize it is completely silent. No frogs, no cicadas, no leaves, even though I can see a couple of the fat frogs and feel the breeze on my face. My hair was even blowing in it, but I'm the only thing making noise for some reason. That kind of silence where your ears start to ring. Ears ringing. I run down the path and emerge into my grandma's yard. Go inside. Leave doorknob on porch. Eat awesome southern grandma food.
Be me. Avid hunter due to the nice wilderness. One day I get a text from my cousin in central Missouri. A little backstory, his dad got a very good job here in Pennsylvania. And he got a promotion, which resulted in him going out there. Last time I was in Missouri was around 6 years before this on a visit to these guys. Basically, my cousin invited me to go to the Ozarks on a hunting trip as we haven't seen each other in a while. A few weeks later, we arrived. After greeting my cousin, we drove around the woods and stuff. He brings his friends along. We go back to the house after a few hours of driving around. We herd back to their house. My cousin's house is off a back road and has a few buildings on the property. One 2-story home, one guest house, which is really just a cabin and a few sheds. The next we go on a morning hunt. Really didn't see much other than a few deer. On our way back, however, we spotted a fast-moving animal off the trail we were using. Cousin slams the brake on the ATV we were using. Friend points it out. After a moment of confusion, we realized it was nothing but a mountain lion. Went back to his house, relaxed for the rest of the day. By nightfall, we went out to go camping in the wilderness. Has a cabin on the slope of another hill. Reaches the cabin by 6 p.m. We enter and set up beds and shit. Me, my cousin, and 2 friends of his, which we will name Jack and Nate. The next day, we do some exploring shit, but keep guns on us. Reach the top of the hill. Overlooks a valley. Decides to move down the hill into the valley. We brought along camping supplies with us in case we were to camp. After a few hours of hiking, Jack insists we rest for a little. My cousin wants to find water and shit. Starting to get dark, so we plan to camp on a creek bed. While finding a creek, I hear sticks cracking about 100 feet behind us. Think it's that mountain lion from earlier. Pulls out my M9. Sees something big running across the path. Black, same size as a bear. But it was stocked, built like the lion we saw earlier, tells the group. They just say keep moving. Listen to them, but keep my pistol out. Reach a creek bed. Looks like a pretty good spot to make a camp. Jack and I set up tents while my cousin and Nate gather wood. Goes to a brush line to take a piss. My cousin and Nate come back from gathering wood. They say they saw the same thing I had seen earlier. They said they were on a hill and saw in a little dip below them. They also brought out that it appeared to have horns. WTF.exe. Well, we caught some fish and I even got a rabbit. Eat that, then head off to bed. Wake up due to what we hear is thunder. Starts to pour. Walks out my tent. Sees the thing across the creek. Thing howls. Reminds of a coyote, but deeper. Friends wake up. Jack pulls out his 270 and takes a shot. After Jack shot at it, we ran. Could hear the thing howling over the winds. Make it to the cabin, slam the door, stay in the cabin overnight. Get back to the site. Tents tore up, everything tossed around. We get back to his house. I head back to Pennsylvania. What the hell did we see? I know that mountain lions are rare in the Ozarks, but I've never heard of some bear cryptid.
We have a cabin in the Ozark National Forest that sits in the middle of 80 acres. I've been enjoying it since around 1988. Over the years, I would be myself there to do some deer hunting with my bow or rifle. On this occasion in the late 90s, I was by myself. I pretty much keep to a routine on a day's adventure. Up way before sunbreak, coffee, descenting shower, dress, and head down to the lower part of the 80 and wait until daylight. I would sit for a few hours and then ease back up to the cabin for a quick bite of breakfast before heading to the upper part of the 80 acres. At that time of my life, I was in construction and worked 4 10-hour days, leaving me with a 3-day weekend. Often this would leave me by myself until later Friday evening for some hunting buddies to show. Anyways, this Friday morning I had already been on the lower part of the 80 and made it back to the cabin. I had added wood to the wood-burning stove and had some breakfast. It was pushing 10 a.m. as I started easing up the incline of the road that led to the front portion. I made it about 20 yards when a deer jumped ahead of me 50 yards up the road. It didn't go very far, just a bit off the road. At the time, the leaves on the ground were like potato chips and I could hear if it had kept going. I froze in my position as I thought of my next move. I stopped just to the side of a small cedar tree. There was very little wind and it was in my favor as I stood motionless. I could just maybe make out the tail end of the deer. I was waiting to see what it was going to do when I started hearing a very odd sound. It sounded like a mini helicopter coming my direction. It continued until it would have been straight above me and only 25 feet up. I had a completely clear view straight to the sound that was loud, but nothing was there. It was not causing any disturbance from the wind that would have been obvious. The cedar wasn't moving nor any leaves that were around me. It was above me for about 2 minutes and suddenly flew up the road and veered off to the left-right over where the deer had stopped. The deer went crazy and blew as it bounced away at a high rate of speed. I was left standing there wondering what in the world just happened. I could not make any sense of it. I obviously heard something directly above me, but nothing was there. The deer heard it as well and reacted the way it did. I wasn't sure what to do, so I continued with my plan to hunt the upper end. 20 minutes later, I was sitting at the base of a large oak patiently waiting for deer to come my way. As I sat there, I replayed in my head what had happened earlier before. I'd been there for an hour and a half or so when I heard that sound again and headed my way. It came right above me. Again. I could not see anything. After about 2 to 3 minutes, I finally stood up and stretched my arms out, expressing, "What the hell?" As I did that, it sped off again, never to be heard again. I don't have a clue. I would describe it as a single prop something. It didn't have the sound the new drones make. Military drone? I don't know. It would have to have some type of cloaking device because I couldn't see it. By the sound, I surmised it would have been the size of the drones we see now.
Commando here. I grew up and still live in the Ozark South. This isn't the rolling green fields and picturesque farm south, but the cold mountains and deep hollers south. I've shot, hunted, fished, and hiked since I was 5 years old. There's enough of my blood in these hills to call them blood relatives, and I'll tell you one thing. If you wander them with that mentality, you will die. It's already bad enough that most people are woefully unprepared to practice even basic land nav, let alone tracking or advanced survival. Each year, there are quite a few instances of some stupid hippie or yuppie getting lost in the woods, and instead of staying put, they throw their hands up in the air and say, "How hard could it be?" and try to get out. Some make it, but every year there are many, many people who simply disappear due to their own incompetence. The farther you go from civilization, the more dangerous it becomes. The animals are larger and may not have developed a fear of humans. Navigation is far more difficult. You have to rely on logging surveys or grainy aerial photography, and help can be hours away if you even have phone reception. The problem is magnified if you head out west, where there are even fewer people. Help is multiple hours away instead of a couple. If you try to tackle the big show and get flown or boated into the backcountry of Alaska, Montana, Idaho, or Canada, help is measured in days, and that is even if you can get satellites overhead for sat phone coverage. This is to speak nothing of the animals that live out there, or the other things that are way out in the wilderness. Pick-related, the mountain range where I hunt here in Oklahoma. My family is from Arkansas, down in the Ouachita Mountains. The range itself extends from western Arkansas over into eastern Oklahoma. The whole damn range is one tangled mess of pine barren, rich red soil, and rocky cliffs. There is next to no law in most of this area, and people generally look after their own, by means of guns. This is how it is throughout most of the rural South, small towns near big cities. People don't trust outsiders. And how are they to know you're not a drug smuggler? If you don't know your shit, or keep your ducks in a row as the saying goes, you can easily get stuck on a simple flat tire and be stranded hours until a tow truck makes its way down. So let's say you're some yuppie who just bought a deer rifle and you decide to head out to the remotest place you can find. So now you're 3 hours on the highway from the nearest actual city, an hour and a half on old logging roads back in the forest from a small town, and you have no cell reception. You're in the middle of an old logging preserve turned game preserve or something to that effect. Thousands of acres crisscrossed with 100-year-old logging roads, some of which are overgrown and some which are occasionally, read once or twice a season, traveled. You are now effectively 5 hours by car from the nearest hospital with no cell reception and in an area that's only really traveled by the occasional forester, hunter, during the 2-week deer season, or wildlife biologist. Congratulations, you're now in the actual woods. There are honest-to-God black bear out there, 500-pound wild boar, and occasionally red wolves and many mountain lions. If a piece of land can support all of these predators, some above 500 pounds, undisturbed by people, it begs the question, what other large things are out there? I'm just going to go ahead and say this as well. Most skeptics, and hikers for that matter, never really go into the actual wilderness. They go to state parks, well-manicured trails, or at best hunting leases. All of these places are well-traveled by people, and animals are shit-scared of people with good reason. 50 years ago, my grandfather could go hunting wearing whatever the fuck he wanted, and the animals really didn't give a shit as long as he was decently quiet. Now, however, animals that live close to people have gotten much smarter and learned to recognize patterns, colors, and scents related to the presence of people. As such, people who hunt in popular areas deck themselves out in expensive full-body camo suits and scent-blocking spray, shampoo, and soap. If Sasquatch exists, it's going to be on the same level as a mountain lion. It would be an apex predator. If you've hunted a mountain lion or been stalked by one, you know they know how to stay invisible to the human eye unless they decide to attack you straight away, highly unlikely. Or they are so hungry they're hunting something else and don't give a single damn you're there. I've hunted bear in Alaska wearing a tracksuit. They just didn't give a damn because they didn't know what the fuck I was. Near my hometown, it's hard to even see boar during the day because they know that's when people are active. If Sasquatch are real, and most actual hill folk sure as shit believe in him, you don't think he'd walk right out in front of a tour bus now, do you? If it's real, it's an animal, and thus behaves like one. To actually find this, you have to engage in Jane Goodall levels of research, spend months and months in a single area searching. If you actually want to know if cryptids exist, put in effort, grab a gun, and go in the woods.
My father was raised in some holler outside Pine Bluff. A few times I joined him for family reunions in the Ozarks, which were pretty raucous and rednecky, complete with shine from family stills. They'd play penny poker into the wee hours telling stories and fighting. I wasn't crazy about them, they're very rough and tumble people, his family. One thing I loved was eavesdropping on the stories at the poker table. Holy shit, Arkansas is scary. The mundane stories of family and holler rivalries, shiner wars, and local psychopaths are scary as it is. But as the nights got later, the stories inevitably turned to things like Bigfoot, panthers, hauntings, a mysterious prowler who lived in the woods and would run the rooftops of the ramshackle houses in their holler. They'd all taken shots at the shadow man with their 410s and shotguns and whatnot, none ever able to hit him. There were stories of a clandestine group meeting in the woods, which was remarkable being that they weren't the Klan and no one knew who they were, presumably a satanic cult. And then there was perhaps the strangest and creepiest of stories. I shit you not, these were stories even the local kids and young cousins would confirm. Most of them had seen in the woods near some sort of plant or factory a clown that held balloons, sometimes even in broad daylight. This could have the most banal explanation and sound so laughably cliché, but it was no less terrifying. It's been 20 years since I've even visited this side of the family, so I don't know if anyone else will recognize these old tales. But I used to stay up late as a child and eavesdrop on these stories told around the penny poker table, and they'd spook me like nothing else.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.